Welcome, pilots! Having recently completed my final high-security combat site video series for the rogue drones, I thought I'd compare the loot potential across all pirate factions. I'll be rating each combat site in a gaming tier list, based primarily on the loot statistics I gathered while producing my video guides. I'll start out by going through each pirate faction, then show the full tier list at the end of the video. So without further ado, let's start with the Serpentis. I'll just throw the Serpentis burrow straight into the D tier. The chance for a faction spawn is quite low, and the site does not appear to escalate. While I'm here, I may as well just throw the Gurista, Angel, and Blood burrow straight into the D tier as well. The only burrow site I had any luck with in terms of loot drops was the Sansha burrow, so I'll sneak that one into C tier. The Serpentis hideaway has a low chance for a faction spawn, but also a low chance for an escalation to the Serpentis narcotics warehouse. And I did snag some faction loot here. Factoring in how quick this site is to run, I'm putting this in the B tier. The Serpentis refuge is very comparable to the hideaway, with similar chances for a faction spawn, loot drop, and escalation to the Serpentis narcotics warehouse. I'll slide this into B tier as well, though it takes a little longer to run. The Serpentis den has almost identical chances for loot as the hideaway or refuge, though it escalates to the much more difficult Serpentis Corporation hydroponic site. While it takes even a little longer to run, the loot potential from a 5 of 10 escalation can be quite high, so I'll sneak this into B tier as well. Moving along to the DED rated sites, unfortunately I didn't gather official loot stats for these back when I made this series. But based on many years of experience, I'm quite confident that it's comparable to Gurista DED sites, but without the potential for the sites becoming bugged. I would guess that about 30 to 40% of all these sites drop some kind of deadspace module, with armor repairs or multi-spectrum coatings or energized membranes having the highest market value. Faction modules are a little more rare, but they do occasionally drop. So, the Serpentis Drug Outlet, Serpentis Live Cargo Distribution Facilities, Serpentis Narcotics Warehouse, and Serpentis Phi Outpost all go into the A tier. And moving to the unrated sites, I'll start with the Serpentis Hideout in the B tier. This site is quick to run, with a reasonable chance of either a faction spawn or escalation, though my stats did show a fairly low chance of actual loot drops. My loot stats for the Serpentis Lookout were a little better, but the site does take a little longer to complete, so I'll slide it into B tier as well. The Serpentis Watch seems to have a much higher chance for loot drops, and while it appears to be a significant engagement, it's actually comically easy to blitz, so I'll put the watch into A tier. The Serpentis Vigil has a guaranteed faction spawn, and quite a high chance for loot drops. If you carry along a supply of Serpentis gold tags with you, it too is super easy to blitz. I thought about putting it into S tier, but the expeditions off of unrated sites have a tendency to drop blueprint copies of implants rather than the implants themselves, so the Vigil goes into A tier as well. Next up is the Guristas, where you're likely to be competing with lots of very assertive Jackdaw, Orthrus, and Gila pilots trying to steal your loot. Starting with anomalies, the Gurista hideaway may have a fairly low chance of a faction spawn and loot in the site itself, but I think its chance to escalate to the Gurista Scout Outpost gives it a bit of an edge over other hideaway sites. I'll sneak it just barely into the A tier. The Gurista's Refuge has similarly low chances for loot, and also escalates to the Gurista Scout Outpost, but with it taking slightly longer to complete, I'll put it just below in the B tier. The Gurista Den also has a low chance for loot, but a chance to escalate to the Gurista's Hallucinogen Supply Waypoint. With the strong potential in the escalation site, I'll put it in the B tier. The Gurista's DED rated sites are in a bit of an interesting state. The Pith Robux asteroid mining site seems to have a decent chance of dropping deadspace loot, but an equal chance of simply being bugged out. The Pith Merchant Depot is in a similar place, perhaps with an even bigger chance of being bugged out. So while these two sites could easily be A tier, or perhaps even S tier if this situation was fixed, I'm going to have to throw them both into C tier. The Gurista Guerrilla Grounds and Gurista Scout Outposts thankfully do not have the same issues, and each have a good chance of dropping deadspace modules such as shield boosters, or the multi-spectrum shield hardener. I'm close to putting these in S tier, but feel like they're more of a strong A tier. My loot stats for the Gurista unrated sites were very comparable to those of their Serpentis counterparts. So I'll be putting the Hideout and Lookout in B tier, and the Watch and Vigil in A tier. I do have to say, however, that the Gurista Watch and Vigil sites are not as easy to blitz. The Gurista Vigil is particularly cumbersome, even if you keep a supply of Gurista gold tags with you. The guaranteed faction spawn in the site is on a timer rather than a trigger, and taking the gate to the third area for the chance of the escalation requires you to clear the second room of NPCs. I'm almost talking myself into sliding it down into B tier, but the chance for faction loot is quite high, so I'll keep it where it is. And now let's move on to the Angel Cartel. The Angel Hideaway has a low chance of a loot drop, and in my personal experience does not actually escalate, so I'm throwing it in the D tier with the burrows. Both the Angel Refuge and Angel Den can escalate to the Angel's Red Light District. While they also have a low chance for a loot drop, this escalation potential puts these sites into the B tier. The Angel Cartel DED rated sites are unfortunately in a similar place as the Guristas. While the Minmatar contracted biofarm isn't bugged in the same manner, its loot potential seems to be much lower than normal. The Angel Creocorp mining site, however, is indeed frequently bugged. I'm putting both of these in the C tier, alongside their Gurista counterparts. The Angel Repurposed Outpost and Angel Cartel Occupied Mining Colony, on the other hand, both have a good chance of dropping dead space modules. So again, like their Gurista counterparts, I'm putting these in the A tier. For the unrated Angel sites, I found the hideouts seemed to have better drop rates than the Lookout, though the latter's escalation was reasonable. I almost want to slide the Angel Lookout into the C tier, but I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt and putting both of these in the B tier. The Angel Watch has a high chance for faction spawns, but its loot potential seems much more muted than its Serpentis or Gurista counterparts, so I'm putting it in the B tier as well. The Angel Vigil, on the other hand, has a guaranteed faction spawn with pretty good loot potential both in the site and in its escalation. This site can be really rough, but once you know how to blitz it, it's definitely A tier. Next up are the Blood Raiders. Similar to its Angel counterpart, the Blood Hideaway has a low chance of a loot drop, and I never witnessed it escalate, so it'll join the others in the D tier. The Blood Refuge and Blood Den each have a fairly low chance of loot, but a reasonable chance to escalate. The Refuge can escalate to the Molzataw Monastery, while the Den escalates to the Blood Raider Psychotropics Depot. I'll put both of these into the B tier. The Blood Raider DED rated sites seem to be rather supercharged during my playthroughs, all having a dead space module drop rate upwards of 70 to 80%. I'm throwing all of these in the S tier. The unrated Blood Raider sites seem to have a reasonably predictable increase in loot potential moving from the hideout up to the Vigil. The Blood Watch can be a little cumbersome to run with all the web-fying spy drones, so I'm putting the hideout, lookout, and watch all in the B tier. The Blood Vigil can be quite difficult, but it's possible to blitz with high enough DPS. It also has a strong loot potential. I'm almost ready to put it in the S tier, but I think I'm keeping it in the A tier. Moving along to the Sansha's Nation. The Sansha Hideaway has a low loot potential, but can escalate to the Sansha's Command Relay Outpost. Couple this with how quick it is to run, and I'm going to sneak this into the A tier. The Sansha Refuge has similar chances for loot, also potentially escalating to the Sansha's Command Relay Outpost. It's a little slower to run, so I'm dropping it down into the B tier. The Sansha Den also goes into the B tier for similar reasons, though it will escalate to the Sansha's Nation Neuroparalytic Facility. The Sansha's Nation DED rated sites are similarly supercharged as their Blood Raider counterparts. The only exception is the Sansha Military Outpost, which is occasionally bugged out, though this isn't as common as its Gurista counterpart. I'm putting it in the A tier, while the rest go into the S tier. The unrated Sansha sites also have a predictable increase in loot potential. I'm putting the hideout and lookout in the B tier, but the watch and vigil in the A tier. The Sansha Watch is particularly easy to blitz if you keep a supply of Sansha silver tags with you, since the faction spawn in the second room is part of the initial group of defenders. And the final faction is the Rogue Drones, which have quite a unique set of combat sites. The two easier drone anomalies are the Drone Collection and Drone Cluster. My loot stats here were along the lines of burrow sites, so I'm putting both of these in the D tier. The Drone Assembly and Drone Gathering seem to have at least some small chance of a loot drop, and may escalate to the Rogue Drone Asteroid Infestation. While my personal stats for the Gathering were quite poor, I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt and putting these two into the C tier. there are only 2 drone DED rated sites. The Infestation Sprout dropped nothing for me during my playthroughs, so I'm throwing it into the D tier. While the Asteroid Infestation did actually drop the odd Shadow Serpentis module, I'll put it in the C tier. The unrated drone sites all have a guaranteed faction spawn. Moving from the Haunted Yard to the Desolate site to the Chemical Yard, each seems to have a slightly higher chance of faction loot than the previous. Most of these drops were the Rogue Drone 46X Nexus chip. So I'm putting the Haunted Yard in the C tier, the Desolate site in the B tier, and the Chemical Yard in the A tier. And there you have it. My personal ratings for every high-security combat site, using loot potential as the primary factor. You can decide how to use this tier list however you like. But if your interest is this per hour, I think it's pretty clear that the sites I've placed in higher tiers are the least likely to, waste your time, shall we say. Another way to look at combat sites is by its type. Blitzing anomalies that have a chance to escalate can be a great way to gather up DED sites where you'll be highly unlikely to end up competing with other players. DED sites found by probing them down can often be competitive, but most of them have a strong potential to drop deadspace modules. Most unrated sites can be blitzed, and all have some potential to escalate to an expedition with up to 4 encounters. I often find myself appreciating that expeditions can help guide you to an updated exploration route. Expedition finales, however, typically have a very different loot table, and many of them take you to a low-security system. If you're primarily running combat sites to make ISK, it's perhaps within reason to simply avoid low-security travel. Most of the expeditions that come off watch and vigil sites make for interesting and fun encounters in their own right. So from an explorer's perspective, I do recommend running these at least once just for the experience. If you ever need a little help running any of these combat sites, you can check out my comprehensive video series here on this channel. I'm currently working on a new video series covering PvE fits for regular cruisers. While these videos will be geared towards younger players within their first month of skill training, I'll also be providing fits for Omega pilots over on my website at RileyEntertainment.com. Stay tuned to Riley Entertainment for more solo PvE guides, and smash that like button if you enjoy my content.